Well, good morning everyone and welcome back. This is video number 4 in my series that I'm doing on how to plan your wash sequences and how to manage edges in a complex watercolor painting. In the previous video, I started to establish some of the palest tones in the painting using a wet on wet technique in the sky, in the river, and now in this video I'm going to move on and continue to establish some lighter areas, but on the far river bank and also on the bank close to us where the sun is shining and catching some of the supports and the railings in that complex area where the jetties are close to the boats. Now, before I start painting, I just want to pick up on something that I mentioned in the previous video. When you're painting on a larger size sheet of paper like this, so almost half sheet, it can be difficult to manage the washes that you've planned out if you've wet the whole paper and are dropping in all the areas that you want at once. The more experienced you are, the more capable you are at mixing your colours accurately and quickly, and the more confidence that you have with your brush strokes, the more you're able to paint like that. And we see it a lot on YouTube and Instagram, where very experienced painters paint this way, but it's not easy to do. And that's why in this series I'm showing you a more relaxed, a more considered approach where you can tackle different areas of the painting individually and concentrate on getting those looking the way that you want those to look before moving on to another area of the painting without having this worry that perhaps everything's drying up on you and am I going to start getting runbacks because I don't get the timing right in this area of the painting while this one's wetter or drier, or all those sort of complicated thoughts that go through the mind when we're painting in that way. It's a fun way to paint, and I often paint like that, particularly with smaller formats and painting outdoors. But we're here in the studio. We're able to take some time to get things the way we want them to be. Well, I'm going to put some washes onto the far riverbank now, and I think that will start to bring the painting along quite nicely. Okay, so I'm re-wetting the paper, and like I said, you must use crystal clear water for this. It's no good going back into your sort of muddy pot of paint and re-wetting the area, or you will have problems. So use nice clear water. I've left the house unpainted because I don't really want any paint running into that. And I'm just coming down over the far bank here, bringing this water down across the river here, because what you have to be careful of when you drop colours in wet on wet is that you give yourself enough room for there to be a little bit of run out, because if you paint too close then the paint will just dilute and run up to the wet edge that you have established on the paper. So give yourself plenty of room to get these colours in. I have them already mixed on my palette. Here's some burnt sienna, a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of ultramarine in there, and these are going to be for the area of background hills here, and I'm just going to drop these in warm it up ever so slightly as we come down here, but we don't want it too bright because this is in the middle distance, and you can see it runs through here as well. And the trees here and the top of these grasses on the riverbank are quite bright in colour. The sun's catching those, so I'm going to drop those in. You can see a few small pencil marks here, hopefully, where I want to have a crisp edge defined on the top of some of these trees. So I'm just going to allow it to run above that, because when I paint the darker bank of trees on top, I'll be cutting round the top of these trees and there'll just be a soft edge here. I'm not going to be matching two edges up to each other. damp brush, I can just dictate where that paint is going to run to. There's a slightly brighter green here that I'm going to put on the reeds that are closer to us, which is a little cadmium yellow, a little bit of raw sienna and some cobalt blue running together there. And this colour here is a bit more earthy, so it's got a bit more raw sienna in it. And I'm just going to bring that down to the edge of the riverbank. And at this point, I'm not too worried about colour variation, because my washes that I'm going to put on top of that will give me what I want. And then there's a little colour running along the bottom of the bank. It's good to get that in at this point too. You can see that the brown here's just run up a little bit higher than the top of the house than I wanted, but that's fine. I can just take a damp brush, remove that. I'll put a little more bright green in here. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that as a base wash in this area. You can see that the brighter green on this side has run up into the clear water. That's fine. It's going to dry with a soft edge, and then the darker bank of trees over the top will define some of these underneath. It's the same with the grasses and the reeds growing on the riverbank. I'll be able to dry brush some texture over the top of those in a darker colour to suggest shadow and to suggest form on the riverbank. And likewise, the green and the brown has run down a little bit into the water that was painted below, so it's coming down into the river. That's okay too, because there's going to be an element of reflection from the bank. But you can see, if you look carefully at the image we're working from, the reflections here are quite pronounced. They're quite crisp, and I like that. So we're going to be defining some more reflections in this area of the painting. But by having this wet on wet wash here, it just allows me to establish some of these paler tones, these brighter colours, before I start putting the darker washes around it and on top of it. So I'm just going to let that dry, and while it's drying I just wanted to point out too that I took the masking fluid off the cabin on the boat here. You can leave it on if you want, but I've come back to this after a couple of days and it doesn't pay to leave masking fluid on the paper for too long. It can sometimes damage the surface when you take it off. So I've taken that off. You can see it's preserved a nice crisp white area to the cabin next to the darker river, so that's good. The next area will be the sunlit areas on the right hand side, or the bank that's closest to me. So we're going to do that next. Now what I'm going to do just before this area dries, it's damp at the moment, it's got a slight sheen on it. I'm just going to suggest some hedgerows that are running across the brown area of field. And I want to do it now because it's going to give me a soft edge. These are middle distance elements and I don't want them to be too obvious, and I don't want them to jump forward in the painting. So let's just put them in now quickly with a little rigger brush. There's one that runs up the field here, just underneath the house, something like that. And then there's a few more there. I might even just have one coming down this way. That kind of looks nice. Remember, you're creating. You don't have to rely exactly on what you see in the painting itself. Just going to add a little bit of Hooker's green into that. And we'll have another one that's just coming along here. And it's running across the top into that area of trees on the left hand side. As you can see, because I waited for the paper to be almost dry, I'm able to put these marks in and they've largely held their place on the paper, but they're soft edged. They have fuzzed out into that area of brown field, and that's nice. It's a middle distance area of the painting. We want that to be soft. We want things like hedges and small trees to be suggested in that area. Now, as this dries up completely, it's good to keep an eye on it if you've got the time, because sometimes funny things can happen and they can start running out more than you expected. So while you've got time to go and put the kettle on, it's not a bad idea just to come back to it and make sure that everything is in order. And it all looks fine to me up to a point, but I've just got a funny edge here, which came from the water that I painted on initially around the house. I was a bit too generous, I think. So funnily enough, I've got a little edge that's appeared there that I didn't really want. It's no problem. I can show you how to deal with things like that. I could just leave it as it is, and when the dark trees and the roof come over the top, you won't really notice it. But if it's in a more obvious part of the painting, where you think, oh, it might show through the next wash that I put on top and I'm not happy with it, I'll show you a way of dealing with that once this is dry. Okay, so this side is completely dry. Now let's wet this side of the painting, and we can focus on putting in all the pale and bright tones around this area of jetties on the riverbank. Crystal clear water again. And what I'm making sure here is that I avoid the boats, or that I should say the pale areas of the boats. It doesn't matter too much, but I'm just going to keep this area of water around here like that. Okay, I'm working with a smaller brush now, and I'm just going to put in some colour for this area of reeds on the right hand side that's just catching the sun at the top of the bank. It's got almost a sort of pinky colour to it, and where are they? They're sort of in here. You can see where the fence is along the top here. I'm painting up into that because when this is all dry and I paint the fence, I can define the top of this area of grasses. And I think I'll just put in a little bit of this bright green too. Around here. And now what I want is quite a strong mix of raw sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna as well. And I'm going to start putting in these sunlit areas of the jetty. Don't worry too much about keeping to the edges. We're just laying this warm colour down. It's coming right across here, down here, through there. In fact, it probably makes sense just to block in all around there, because the darker tones of the grasses and the bank behind it are going to be what gives this area, or these supports and railings and planks, their definition. So it doesn't matter if this fuzzes out side of the pencil lines, because we will establish the edge with the darker tone in due course once this is all dried. The ladder. Don't forget these struts that come down into the river. It gets a little bit cooler. There's a little bit of shade here, but it's still paler than the background. So we'll just suggest that like so. We've got some colour on this area here. That's that nice rusty pole there that we can put in due course. But let's just put a bit of colour there as well. It's much brighter on the end there. Okay, that's good. Now I'm going to get a larger brush and just paint in the reflections, or suggest roughly where they're going to go, because once again these will be defined as the painting develops. It gets a bit more murky over this side, which is fine. In fact, I'm going to keep this whole area here quite dark. So really all I'm doing here is blocking in these colours with a degree of approximation. I know that I'm going to be coming back over the top of this once it's dry with a little bit more work. And now while this is wet, I can fine tune it a little more. So a little bit more raw sienna, I think, is required just through here where it's quite strong, that reflected colour. It's going to dry up a lot lighter, don't forget, as we're working wet on wet here. And as we know, watercolour dries up lighter anyway. There's a nice bright bit through there as well. And then at the top of the ladder, there's a stronger colour through here. It's a little bit more reddy orange, so a little bit more burnt sienna in there is quite nice. Same through here. And what I'm doing at this point really is just checking that the areas that are going to be left when I paint round have actually got colour on them. So I'm just adding some more here because I'd sort of missed out the top of that area. It's the same here. I've just left the tops of those posts. There's good. I've got that light colour in there for the grass, which is nice. I could probably be a little more ambitious with the green, so a bit of raw sienna, a bit of cobalt, a little bit of cadmium yellow, just to liven that up a bit. Yeah, a little stronger in here. And it'll all get darker as it comes down in here, so I'm not too worried about that. It's just about establishing these brighter, paler areas at this point. And then take a piece of kitchen paper, take most of the moisture out of your brush and just feather the shapes together like this, which just makes your job easier when you come to paint the darker tones in. There's less abrupt areas to deal with, albeit they're all soft. You can see they're all soft edged, but just try to make it so that you haven't got a strong area that you've got to deal with when you match another strong tone next to it. Damp brush is good at just blending these together. Probably needs to be a bit darker through there. I may just be too far out with that reflection. It's going to come down here. So it really needs to be sitting more under there like that. That's probably more accurate. Don't forget with reflections, if something is at this angle on the bank, its reflection is not going to be here, it is going to be the mirror opposite. So it will need to come this way. Yeah, that's good. I'm not going to fiddle too much more with this because it's going to have a lot of darks over the top of it. But you can see now that I'm at a place where a lot of the brighter, warmer tones have been established. This is what's going to give the painting this feel of late evening sun. I'm not too worried at this stage about putting a little bit of colour, a little bit of warmth onto the boats because they're relatively easy to manage. They're simple, self-contained shapes. There's not a lot of darks in and around them that are going to be difficult for me to paint. So I'm going to leave those and deal with those separately. But over here, where there's a complex array of lights and darks all mixed together, it's a different issue. Get those light tones, those warm colours established, and then when we come around with our darker tones and our cooler colour temperatures, we can start to give these definition and they'll start to pop beautifully as the painting progresses. And because I'm planning my washes and executing them like this, I then have much greater control over where I'm going to preserve my crisp edges, where I'm going to allow there to be soft edges, where I'm going to allow some edges to disappear completely. Now that's all got to dry, and what I said I would do is just deal with this hard edge here on the left-hand side of the house. In reality, I would just leave that. It doesn't bother me too much because there's a dark roof to go on top of it, there's darker trees next to it, and by the time you've painted those in, this largely has disappeared. But let's imagine you were just putting a very pale glaze over here and there wasn't a dark roof on here and you were worried that you've got an edge here that's going to be a problem when you put the trees in. So what you can do is get a flat brush like this, take out most of the moisture once you've wet it, and then just with the corner of it, just chip away at that line like so, and dab it with a bit of kitchen paper, and it's gone. It's now a soft edge, and so it makes your job much easier when you put a roof on that's dark, or a dark tree there, or whatever it is you're doing. And this is a useful little tactic to have when you're looking at areas in the painting where you need to soften some edges. Here's another one, for example. Again, it doesn't really bother me that much, and if I was doing this painting not as a demonstration to illustrate this particular point, I'd just leave this and turn this into something. But you can see along here, where I put the masking fluid on, it was a little bit uneven. And when I took the masking fluid off, you can see that the blue hasn't created an entirely crisp edge to the top of the boat, which is actually somewhere where I want to have a crisp edge. Well, you can do the same thing if you want. Like I said, it wouldn't bother me in the normal course of events because I'd just paint something across the top of that. But you can take the flat brush, chip away at that edge, blot it with the kitchen paper, and there you are. It's a little bit more crisp. Some people don't like that type of crispness and detail in the painting. And they would say, well, you know, Ollie, you're talking about a problem that really isn't a problem. Well, that just depends on how you view things. I like crispness, I like detail, and actually I like it right here on this boat. So tidying up sometimes at a stage like this on areas that are dry can be helpful. It's not a major thing, and try to avoid wiping out too much. Try to get it right first time round if you can, but it's just a useful little technique to have in your locker if you need it. Well, I've got to the point in the painting where I consider the development of the washes to have progressed nicely. I'm not going to do any more in this video. Next time round, it will be a case of starting to define some areas, and we will start to make decisions on where we're going to put our darker tones, where we're going to lose some edges, where we're going to have crisp edges, but that's for next time. Well, I think the painting's coming along quite nicely. I have the paler, warmer tones in place, and that will enable me to move ahead with the painting, defining darker shapes and allowing me to achieve the combination of edges that I want in the painting. Thanks ever so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, I'd be grateful if you would click on subscribe if you like what you've seen, and also to click on the little thumbs up icon. That all helps the channel. So I hope you've picked up some useful techniques. Happy painting, and I look forward to seeing you next time.